Welcome to part 2 in the fundamentals of architectural drawing. Okay, so now that we have built our foundation, we're ready to build the dwelling, living area of our residence. Okay, and so let's start with the fact that most residences in the United States, and specifically in the South, are stick framed using wood studs. And I think it should be pretty obvious as to why it's called stick framing. They look like sticks, they're made from wood. In the United States, there are wood studs are made from different types of woods. But one of the most popular actually is southern yellow pine that we are very familiar with in our area because these trees grow like they're like the tree version of weeds. When I was a student in college and I took a course on site planning, the professor deducted 5 to 10 points for every tree on the site that you cut down to locate your house. And, rightfully so. With the exception of pine trees. For every pine tree you took out, he gave you a point. Um, I don't know about you guys, but we we fear the pine trees. They just fall over so easily. They're easily infected by beetles. They'll fall apart, and so they are considered can be considered a nuisance. But the good news is that they do because they're a soft wood and they grow fast. They actually are considered a sustainable source of building material. And then there are a whole bunch of terms that we use to refer to the different parts and pieces that we use in stick framing to frame the house. And this is showing you above the foundation. This is obviously not just sitting on the ground like that, it is sitting on a foundation. And it starts with the sill plate. And we'll get a little further down and I'll show you an example of the sill plate sitting on top of the foundation. Know that any time wood touches another material, especially masonry, or anything like it comes in contact with the ground or metal, you want to make sure that it is pressure treated. And the reason for that is wood can either be permanently sustained as dry or permanently sustained as wet. It's when it gets wet and when it gets dry, and then wet and dry and wet and dry, that it rots. Um, Also, if it's close to the ground, the termites will get in it and they will eat it. Also, ants. Ants will eat wood or tunnel through it. I'm not exactly sure. I have to look that one up. But I do know that ants will tunnel through wood and destroy it. So we're going to start with the sill plate, and the sill sits on top of the foundation, and it is bolted with an anchor bolt into place. And then from there, we begin to build on top of that with joists and studs. And then all the different names you see here are the names that are given to the different parts of framing. And here's another slide to show you different framing terms and what they are and what they mean. For example, post and beam is used on the bottom, as you can see down here. So there would be concrete below this, and this is a post that the post is sitting on, and then on top of that is a beam. It's calling this a bearer, but it is a beam, and joists sit on top of beams. And then there's anytime a 2x4 is run this way, it is a plate. So there are plates, and then there are studs. And oh, this must be British. Nogging is not. Sorry about that. I just saw it called nogging. Yeah, we call this bracing. So interesting. Yeah, jack stud. We do use jack, meaning a short stud. This is a window opening. And so some of these are used in American construction and some of them are not. Okay, but the ones before are, this is what we call it, jack stud. Rafters have to do with the roof. Collar beams hold the roof in place because without this collar beam across these structures, and you guys are going to learn about this when you take wood construction, this would collapse. So names and terms there, and we'll get more into these as we go. Platform and versus balloon framing, and the difference. These are the two main types of framing that are used in residences in the United States. And the difference is that a platform means that it has a floor, and then the studs sit on the floor, and then it has another floor that works as both the ceiling for the space below and the floor above. And then the next round for the second story, if you have a second story, those sit on top of that platform. So this is separate from this, as opposed to this one where the studs run all the way to the roof, underside of the roof structure, and then the floor is framed within them. And the reason, probably pretty obvious as to why this is more popular, is because trying to get trees this long to cut into wood, the process of using anything that big, storing it, transporting it, is going to drive up the price. So we typically, this is shorter studs are cheaper. Here's framing, what framing looks like at doors and windows. And we have to have headers across. This is usually done with 2x10s or 2x12s, as opposed to a stud that is, these are generally 2x4s. The nice thing about framing in wood construction, and again, you guys are going to take a course on this, is that there are some standard sizes that we generally use, and that is because residences tend to be similar, standard. Wood tends to be cheaper, so we tend to make it out of wood rather than metal studs. But anytime you're going to, right, remember we talked about how the roof is being carried, the weight of that roof, which is providing the main part of the shelter, is being carried down the walls and into the foundation and out into the ground. Well, we've got weight bearing down right here. So what's going to happen when we cut these studs to put in an opening? Because these studs are generally 16 inches on center, meaning from the middle of that stud to the middle of that stud. That's just generally spaced at 16 inches. And that is to help evenly carry the weight down. So if you start to put these too far apart, if they start to get further and further apart, at some point this is gonna sag. And so what we want to do whenever we need to cut an opening between our span, because if this is a, say this is a 3-foot door, right? We're no longer 16 inches apart between the edge of this door and the edge of this door. We are more than 3 feet apart if the door is 3 feet. Okay, so what we do to make sure that weight is being transferred is we cut the studs for the opening, but then we put in that header. And what that header will do is allow the weight to transfer down the stud and across the header and then down the next stud. And those, and that, that works there. And then for a window, we frame this out with some bottom jack studs or bottom cripples. They have a couple different names. Contractors also have different names for things than we do sometimes. And so you kind of learn that as you go. And then a sill. This is the window sill. You've ever heard people say window sill? That's what it's referring to. It's what the window's going to sit on. And so then we'll come back in here and we'll put in a window and we'll put in a door, and that weight will have been transferred, and this will, keep the bottom cripples or the jack rafters will keep the window off the ground. And as we talked about, pressure treated wood, it isn't always green. It used to always be green, and that's how you knew it was pressure treated. Sometimes it's not. Like you can see the wood over here is green too on the bottom, on this right image. You could see that there's the concrete, that poured concrete for the foundation for the basement, and you can see they've placed a barrier. It looks like a barrier or it could be they could have gone back and put some um, sealant in here. But you see, that is clearly pressure treated. And so what happens is that wood being next to concrete is going to get wet. And so the pressure treated is going to prevent it from rotting. And then on top of that, we can add additional sill plates, and there's an anchor bolt. Those are anchor bolts that are anchoring the sill plates into the foundation. Wood comes in a lot of different sizes. Now, it used to be that when you got a 2x4, which is right here in the middle, which is what most wall studs are made out of, it used to be when you got a 2x4, it was a 2x4. But the commercial industry has shaved off half an inch so that when you buy a 2x4, it is actually a 1.5 by a 3.5. And so when you draw drawings for accuracy, you should use the 1.5 by 1 and by 3.5. You should not draw a 2x4 because it'll get your measurements off, it'll get your numbers off. So whenever you're drawing or whenever you're creating your BIM materials, your wall sections, you want to make sure you use a 1.5 by 3.5 for your studs. And then, and it's that way for all the studs up to 2x8s. And then at that, the 8 becomes 7.25. And the 2x10 becomes 9.25. Same with plywood. Nominal thickness versus actual thickness. Okay, and so once we get the studs up, we insulate. And there are different types of insulation and primary. I'm not going to go into all the really exceptional stuff in the beginning. We're just going to talk about the main stuff, the common materials, because you can learn about the more uncommon ones, and we'll learn about those later on. Okay, and so bat and blanket insulation and blown in spray foam insulation, those are the main ones that get used. These are bats, blankets. They fit in the wall. They tend to be pink. Sometimes they're not pink. And they're just cut. They're usually as wide as, that's why they are built to fit inside that expectation. This is going to be 16 inches on center. That might be further apart, but anyway, so it fits in there, in the wall, and you cut it to fit, and it provides insulation. And we talk about insulation in terms of R values. So you're going to see that term R value on materials. And I'll show you another drawing here in a second. You can also spray it into the cavity, and it just fills that cavity. It puts insulation in that cavity. Now, if we were in a class and I would ask you guys, what is the worst insulation or worst insulator? What has the lowest R value of any material? What do you think that is? Most people guess glass, and that's right. Glass is terrible. That's why we'll sandwich a couple of pieces of glass in a window with some radon gas inside to prevent it from leaking out too badly, help keep the house warm. That radon gas is horrible for the environment, so you never ever want it to get out of that sandwich. But also, if I ask students what is the best insulator, I have never ever had anybody guess this right, because I didn't guess it right when I was a student either. And the answer is air. Air is actually the best insulator there is. And so that's why with these insulation bats, blankets, if you were to look at them really, really closely, you'll see that they have captured pockets of air. And those pockets of air help insulate the walls. And this spray foam, it puffs up, right? You can see they're spraying on there thin, and it will puff up, and it'll have all these air cells in there, and those air pockets are actually what is driving up that R value. And so when we talk about R values here, we are talking about the material, what the material does to reduce cold from coming in during the winter and heat from going out during the winter, as well as vice versa in the warmer months where, we're trying to keep the cool in the summer and the heat out. And the insulation helps us to do that and drives down the the the, um, the cost of heating and cooling your space. Okay, we're going to stop here and continue in the next video.